2. Woo!
Welcome to the Authenticity Lab, a podcast where we celebrate the journey of reconnecting with our authentic selves. I'm Dr. Kelsey Miles. I'm a musician, a songwriter, and also a chemistry professor. And I'm so excited that you are here. Each week, I'll share real stories and break them down into small yet powerful experiments that will inspire you to live boldly, lead with curiosity, and embrace your most authentic self. Are you ready? Great. Let's dive in. In today's episode, we are exploring what happens when we challenge the expectations we have about how our lives should be. Yep, and I'm going to share a personal story about how a spontaneous choice to stop at a karaoke bar one night became a major turning point in my life. And because the holiday season is upon us, you're definitely going to want to stay till the end of the episode where I share a life experiment that you can run that will bring more joy into your life. Of course, I had to wear my nerdiest chemistry top that I own, which is my chemist tree shirt. If you are listening on YouTube, you can visualize it. I will explain it if you are just listening in now. It is a Christmas tree made of the periodic table elements, and at the very top of the tree, of course, we have our gold stars. So I have the element of gold, which is symbolized by a capital A and a lowercase u, AU, and that's stands for a Latin term, aurum, which means shining dawn. Don't worry, I will maintain a baseline of nerdiness, perhaps not this high, throughout the episode. At the very end, I'll share an experiment and guide you through the framework of the scientific method so you can get the most out of it. This experiment will help you flip your expectations so you can reconnect with what truly lights you up. We are absolutely ringing in the joy this week. Let's get started. Picture this. I'm standing in my dream lab, huge glass windows and long benches with lots of room to do chemistry. All the glassware is organized. I'm at my fume hood. I can hear the rushing of the air going into the hood, and I'm setting up my experiment. I can hear my colleagues talking about science and clanking of glassware. I can hear the beeps of the instrumentation nearby. And I'm exactly where I wanted to be. I'm at a top-tier university getting my PhD so I can have a career as a professor in chemistry with a big research group. It was everything I ever dreamed of. And I couldn't help but notice I had this tug at my heart late at night, one evening while I was doing chemistry, that asked me, is this really what you want? Gosh, have you ever had an expectation in your life, some goal that you really wanted to reach, and you get there, and it's not what you thought it was, wasn't what it was all cracked up to be? That's where I was. I was at this unexpected gap of this expectation and reality. And it turned out, though, this was my most beautiful mistake unfolding right in front of me. Let me read you the lyrics to my first track on my album, I Am. The song is called Beautiful Mistake. This is in my I Am lyrical journey. I imagined a beautiful masterpiece, an infallible vision just waiting to be released.
I imagined a beautiful masterpiece, an infallible vision just waiting to be released.
When I moved to Madison, Wisconsin to get my PhD, I was running towards my dream life. It was perfect. I wanted to be a chemistry professor with a big research group And studying under a well-known scientist in a top-tier university was exactly what you needed. I was running from my controlling relationship, and that move from Ohio to Wisconsin was really me betting fully on myself. I wanted to pour everything into this. I wanted to build something I was really proud of. And during the first 6 months of my graduate career, I worked tons. I worked so many hours. There was even one night a postdoc that was there. A postdoc is someone who already has their PhD and is continuing their scientific research under another advisor. And he even told me, he said, "Kelsey, you don't have to work so many hours in this lab." And I, of course, didn't listen to him. And most of my colleagues would leave around 5 or 6 p.m. And I would usually stay until 9, 10, sometimes 11 o'clock at night. All I did was chemistry. I would eat, I would sleep, and I would do chemistry. It was the perfect thing I needed at the time. And I didn't realize how much I was using work to cope with all of the emotions that I still needed to work through after that controlling relationship. And so what I would do after everyone would leave, I would turn on Pandora, and we had speakers in the lab, and I would turn it up really loud, and I would sing along with some of the greats like Aretha Franklin and Bonnie Raitt, Janis Joplin, Etta James, Sheryl Crow, and I would sing at the top of my lungs. And it was in those late night sessions that I started to work through some things without even knowing it. One night, I remember this vividly. I was singing at the top of my lungs and I didn't know my colleague was still there. And he startled me big time. And he said, "Kelsey, you're a good singer." And I was like, "Whoa, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were here." And he goes, No, keep going. Like, don't worry, keep going. It's the first time I had heard in a long time I was a good singer. I really didn't think I was. I just did it because my heart was just exploding, really. I was a choir singer in high school, but a blues soul vocal doesn't always lend itself to be the best choir singer. So I don't blame my high school teacher for telling me to be quiet. This kept going, and a few weeks after he had said that to me, I started to listen to that tug at my heart of, is this really all that you want to do? You don't have friends, you aren't really expanding, you're simply pouring into this one bucket. And that was when I started to listen a little more to that pull. And so on the way home one evening, I walked past, it's called Karaoke Kid in Madison, and it's a karaoke bar. And so I decided that I was going to go inside one night. And I thought, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to sing a song. It scares me, but I'm going to do it because I need something different. I'm listening to this little tug that maybe my expectation that this dream life of just doing chemistry really isn't as fulfilling as I had hoped. And without realizing it, that was me doing a life experiment. That was it. I was doing a life experiment without even knowing it. This leads us to step number 1 of the scientific method, which is to ask a question. And my question was pretty simple. It was, what would happen if I stepped out of my routine and I did something that brought me joy? Singing brought me joy in the lab. It went against my expectation of everything being fulfilled with just chemistry. But I couldn't help ask the question. And so that led me to step number 2 of the scientific process, which is form a hypothesis. When I walked by that karaoke bar, I thought to myself, although I'm scared to go in there and sing, I love singing in the lab, and maybe I'll meet some people, maybe I'll make some friends. And at a minimum, I'll be doing something I enjoy around other people who also like singing. So I thought to myself, it could just be a nice little break from chemistry, maybe get my mind off of things. And so I did step number 3 of the scientific method, which is I ran the experiment. So I get into this karaoke bar. It was a small bar and it was kind of dimly lit. And I sat down, I got a beer and I sat down and I was really nervous. And they had this big book of all these songs you could pick from. And so they had one book for song titles and one book for artists. So you could choose how you wanted to search. And so I looked through it and I wish I remembered the song that I did. I looked through the book and I remember being super nervous, but I filled out the little sheet and I put it in the queue to sing. And you always have to tip when you put it there. So I tipped the bartender and I put my piece of paper there. And as I waited, more and more people started to fill the bar, which made me more and more nervous. So when they called my name, I went up and I sang the song, and I remember feeling so happy afterwards. I wasn't thinking about chemistry. I was just in my element singing, and it was so fun. And so I went back to sit down, and this group of this table right beside me introduced themselves, and this girl at this table looked at me and said, "You are such a good singer. You're so good." And she was so sweet. And her name's Elizabeth. She is such an important part of my story because this is not what I expected would happen in this experiment. She told me that she has a guitar and she said, "You have to borrow my guitar." And I looked at her like, I don't know how to play guitar. I've never picked up an instrument other than the plastic recorder, in middle school. And I thought it was a crazy suggestion. She had just met me. She wants me to borrow her guitar. Like, who does that, right? Who does that? She does. Elizabeth, if you're listening to this, thank you. Thank you very, very much. So we became friends and I ended up borrowing her guitar. And I'm telling you, that one night going to the karaoke bar completely turned everything in my life. And it was such a simple experiment that I was doing. This leads us to number 4 of the scientific method, which is make an observation. And that night, not only was I giving myself a break from chemistry, I was doing something I really enjoyed, which was singing. And then it led to connections with people. And above all, I recognized that my expectation was very limited. My expectation that pouring myself into chemistry would fix everything in my life. And getting to that success level was the only thing I needed to feel fulfilled. You see, that wasn't my question. That wasn't what I was trying to answer. Yet, that's what I got from it. That observation of feeling like myself when I was singing was something I didn't expect. I was nervous, yet after I got done performing and meeting people, it felt really closer to home in some ways. And so that leads us to step number 5 of the scientific method, which is to analyze the results. I shared a little bit about how this experiment led to something bigger than what I was really seeking. And if I step back more and view it from me now, this was 10 years ago, that choice of mine, that spontaneous choice to do something that made me feel some joy, was such a small experiment to run that gave me huge results. And in particular, I realized how much my expectations to have chemistry fulfill all of my needs was not correct. And in a way, I had to challenge my own thoughts and my own beliefs that I had to be successful in order to be fulfilled. In fact, that analysis I got from that experiment took me a long time to come to a conclusion and integrate into my life. But that expectation I had about chemistry and getting that degree was really that it was going to solve everything. If I just jumped through all the hoops I was supposed to, and if I was just successful here, none of the other stuff in my life would matter. None of the bad stuff that happened from that controlling relationship would have an impact on me. I would rise above it, right? It would all be better. I'd be completely fulfilled, right? And that's not what happens. That's not how life goes. In fact, this small experiment was my first real foray into understanding the complexity of life. No matter how much you decide, the expectation you have about something is the end-all, be-all, final answer. Life often has another plan, and if you aren't aware and if you aren't paying attention, you will struggle and struggle and struggle. You see, when I ran that experiment, I listened to my curiosity. And if I hadn't listened to that curiosity, I guarantee that I would have still been climbing the ladder on something that would inevitably not fulfill me. That analysis of that observation, the results that I got, helped me understand how important curiosity and being open to your heart being curious about different things is. If you stay curious, you might take that next experiment that could launch your life into something that's really beautiful. This takes us to the end of the scientific method. Step number 6, which is your conclusions and sharing your results. And that's what I'm doing right here on this podcast. If I had not listened to the tug on my heart, which asked me that question about if my expectations were really, really correct, if leaning fully into chemistry and doing nothing but chemistry was really going to fulfill me, that wouldn't have led me to ask a question and have a hypothesis. This little experiment opened myself up to find joy in more than one way. It didn't mean I didn't like chemistry. It meant that there was more to life than just the thing I had the expectation about. In fact, a conclusion that has taken me a long time to integrate, and this will be for another episode of how do you integrate these conclusions, is really how am I able to balance, if you'd like to call it, I'm putting that in air quotes, or juggle many things that bring me joy. Our lives are not this cookie cutter one-way thing. And I learned in that moment that for me, it was going to be more than just chemistry that would fulfill me. I love chemistry. I love science. And I also absolutely love songwriting. And that night at the karaoke bar changed everything. It really did. In some ways, I wonder if I hadn't had those really big expectations and made essentially a mistake to think that only chemistry would fulfill me, and being successful at my job, that's what was going to solve everything. That mistake I made was so beautiful because it led me to ask a question. And then it led me to a karaoke bar where I met someone who let me borrow her guitar. And picking up the guitar changed my life forever. Forever. I became a full-time musician after getting a PhD. In some ways, that mistake was really, really beautiful. I'll read the last lyric in my song, Beautiful Mistake. I cannot change it, so I will embrace it. My beautiful mistake.
I cannot change it, no, so I will embrace it. My beautiful
these mistakes that we make in life often can lead to the most beautiful new story. And one thing I learned from this was that I get to choose how I view that quote unquote mistake. And I'm choosing to embrace it because every step of my journey led me to the next one. And so rather than deciding it was just a mistake that I thought I would lean fully into chemistry, I embraced that I really thought that because it actually led me to my next part of my journey, which was music. All right, now it's your turn. I promised you at the beginning of the episode we would be bringing in some joy into our life. So, before we get to the question that we're going to answer with this week's life experiment, I need you to take a moment, and you might have to pause this episode to reflect on this. I want you to think about something in your life that feels a little out of balance, something that doesn't quite feel right to you. And once you have that, now I want you to think about any expectation you have about that part of your life. Most often than not, when something doesn't feel right to us, it's because we have some expectation tied up with that part of our life. So see if you can tease out what expectation you have. For me, my work in chemistry started to feel a little off. I was pouring myself into it, and the expectation I had was one that I needed to kind of course correct. My expectation was that pouring myself completely into chemistry was going to fix everything in my life, when in reality, I was avoiding a lot of things. And so that expectation you have, what is it about the thing that feels out of balance that you have an expectation about? What is that expectation? And we're going to flip that expectation. Whatever it is you're expecting to get out of that piece of your life, I want you to consider an alternative way to get it. All right? In particular, we're going to focus on something that brings you joy. Expectations that aren't met tend to be things that are lacking in the joy we thought we would receive by that part of our life. So here's your question. Your weekly life experiment beginning question is this. What is something that brings you joy and lots of fulfillment that's outside of your normal routine? This could be anything. This could be literally anything. It could be dancing in the living room. It could be having a phone call with a really dear friend that you haven't talked to for a long time. I want you to think about something that just when you do it, it lights you up. It could be going into the garage and doing a project. Anything. Think of something that brings you complete joy, all right? That's step one. We're asking that question this week. What brings you joy that's outside of your normal routine? So step number 2, you're going to form a hypothesis. How would it feel if you tried to do that thing that brought you joy this week? Most likely it's going to make you feel great. That's a good hypothesis to have. Step number 3, you're going to run your experiment. You're going to do the thing that brings you joy. And number 4 is to make an observation. It's at this step that I want you to be very intentional about. After you do the thing that brings you joy, I want you to think about what you're observing. You might be surprised as to what data you collect. Sure, you might feel joy. You might have some other things come up as well. Then you're going to move to step 5. You're going to analyze your results more holistically. When you're looking at your observation that it brought you joy and you felt a little lighter, maybe you also notice some additional things like I did in my story. I realized the expectations I had were not ones I wanted to carry any further. To expect that job, that career was going to be the end-all be-all. I also learned how important it was for me to lead with curiosity and how when I stayed open to that, really cool stuff happened that wouldn't have happened if I had boxed myself off and kept myself from being curious. So when you do that step 5 and really analyze and just reflect on it, really think about how you felt when you were feeling that joyful thing you were doing. You might uncover a few more things that could really help you for your next experiment. And the last step, step number 6, is you're going to share your results. You're going to come to a conclusion and share your results. If you haven't already done so, please do join the community at kelseymiles.com/thelab. That's THELAB. And in that community is where we're going to share our results from this week. You can also share your results from our previous episode. And whenever you're watching this, you can go in and see how others have done and insert your results there. We're not doing this alone. Remember, experimentation is not perfect. So I don't expect you to do this perfectly. Try this life experiment out. See if you can find a little more joy. At a minimum, you're going to feel better. Do your best to reflect and share your results. And that way we can all learn from each other with this. You know, that night when I stopped at that karaoke bar, I got to tell you, that changed the trajectory of my life. And when we think about these little life experiments that we can do, we really are unaware of how much of an impact they can have. So I really encourage you to do this week. I really think that leading with curiosity can bring things into our lives that we did not think were there. That spontaneous choice of mine to stop at the karaoke bar was such a small experiment, and it gave me way more results than I could have ever imagined. And one of the most important was just challenging these expectations I had. So I'm really excited to hear how your life experiment goes this week. And the song that I shared this episode is called Beautiful Mistake. If you'd like a free download of the song, you can go to kelseymiles.com/thelab and get your free download of Beautiful Mistake. These things in our life that feel like mistakes are actually really beautiful. And when I started to change my perspective about the mistakes that I thought were mistakes, and when I started to view them as these beautiful things just unfolding, it really helped me to gain more out of my life and expand in ways I didn't realize. Thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode, please share this with friends and family that you think could also get something out of this episode, where we challenged expectations and we introduce more joy into our lives so that way we can reconnect with the parts that really light us up. I'll be back next week with another story and a new life experiment to continue to inspire you to live boldly, lead with curiosity, and keep being your most amazing, authentic self.
Yeah, that house will always call you.